Hello everyone, my name is Ben, and today I plan on showing you how I personally set up the new Unity input system to work with VR. I'm going to assume that you have some Unity knowledge and some kind of development environment installed, like Visual Studio Code, or Writer. If you need help installing those, you can find tons of videos showing those steps, so feel free to pause the video and go watch one of those before getting started here. Also, I should note, there are a ton of amazing tutorials out there, but I personally find almost all of them build on either Unity's own interaction toolkit or a third-party library for a lot of their functionality. I can't deny the benefit it provides being able to jumpstart your project with these, but I personally want to know and understand 100% of the code in my project, for better or worse. So I'm going to include as minimal extra stuff as possible in all my tutorials. With that out of the way, first we're going to start a new Unity project, add the necessary packages, and start slinging some code. So let's get started. Let's start by launching the Unity Hub. Once it's open, you can come up here, hit New. I'm going to hit the little drop down button here, and I'll be using Unity 2020.2.3 for this tutorial and most of my future projects. So go ahead and click the engine you want to use, and we can select a template. Any template should work, however I personally use the universal render pipeline, although the built-in 3D or high definition pipeline should work just as well. I'm going to go ahead and give my project a name. Make sure it's in a location I can easily reach, and I'll go ahead and hit create. And I'll be right back once Unity's open. Alright, now that Unity's open, we can come up here, go to Window, Package Manager, and it should open the Package Manager window. You might see that on my screen currently, it's only showing packages that are already in my project. I can easily change that by going up here, selecting it, and switching over to the Unity registry. This should show all non-experimental packages that are currently supported. To get started, I'm going to scroll down to the XR plugin management. I'm going to go ahead and select that, and I'll hit install. Packages can sometimes take a minute to install, so I'll be back when it's finished. Okay, now that the XR plugin is installed, I'm going to scroll back up here towards the Oculus XR plugin. I'm going to go ahead and install that. And while it's installing, it'll be worth noting you should be able to use the OpenXR plugin as well. Personally, I have a Rift S, and I've done some testing with the OpenXR plugin and gotten some weird rendering results. So while I'll move forward with the Oculus XR plugin, I will come back and install the OpenXR plugin just to show the extra steps that it's going to take. Before that though, we want to scroll up to the input system package right here and go ahead and select install on that one as well. Okay, now that the input system package is installed, Unity is giving a warning here that it wants to switch over to the new input system only. So we're just going to go ahead and hit yes here, and it'll restart the engine. Alright, with Unity open back up, mine defaulted with the package manager open. I am going to go ahead and scroll down, select the OpenXR plugin, and go ahead and install that as well. If you install the OpenXR plugin instead of the Oculus plugin, it will go ahead and install the input system package as well. The OpenXR plugin is built to work primarily with the new input system, and it will also offer the option to restart the editor with the new input package selected by default as the input system. Okay, now that I have all my plugins installed, I'm just going to go ahead and close that. I will then come up to Edit, go down to Project Settings. We'll see down here at the bottom we have this XR plugin management with an Oculus and an OpenXR option. If you select the XR plugin management, it'll show you the plugins that are available. We have Oculus and OpenXR. I'll go ahead and show the OpenXR steps. Selecting that, it's going to probably show red indicator here is telling us that something isn't set up correctly. If you click that, it will open up a new window. It tells us that there are 3 issues that we need to resolve. Two of them have fix options. I won't lie, I'm just going to hit fix all. And then the last warning is that we need to select a profile for the input controller. So we can just go ahead and close this down. Go back to our XR plugin management, click Features under OpenXR, and go ahead and select the controller profile that you have. If you have a Vive or an Index, you'll want to select the Valve Index controller profile. Since I have a Oculus Rift S, I'll go ahead and select the Oculus Touch controller profile. And that would conclude the OpenXR setup. However, as mentioned before, I will be moving forward with the Oculus, so I will unclick that, select Oculus, and that's all I'll need to do to set up. Go ahead and close this window, and we can open up our Project tab. Now that we're on our Project tab, I'm going to go up, Create, New Folder. I'll call this folder Core, and then inside of that folder I'm going to make another folder, and I'll call this one Input. Inside of this Input folder, you can right click again, go up to Create, and down here towards the bottom is an Input Actions option. Go ahead and select that. I'm going to name mine Core Input Actions. And now that it's created that object, I'm also going to come over here and select Generate C# class. And for now, I'm going to leave the 3 options that show up as defaults. Go ahead and click Apply. With that now generating, you can come back and double click on the object in the project view, or you can click Edit Asset. And that opens up the Input Action Manager window. Currently we have nothing filled out, but we can come over here to Action Maps, click the plus icon. That's generated a new action map as well as a new action. For now, I'm going to call this action map Right Hand. This new action, it has no binding if you expand here, and the action type is currently button. I want to turn this action into our grip strength, so a 0 to 1 value of how much the user is currently pressing the grip button. So select that where it says button, you can change it over to value. For control type, button is still going to be an either off or on option. For a 0 to 1 value, we want to change it over to axis. As for the action itself, I'm going to rename mine grip strength, and then you can select where it says no binding. The window over here on the right changes, showing that we have no path currently bound. All we have to do is select that. It'll open up a window of possible controller options. We are interested in XR controller. It shows some common bindings. Up here at the top though, we can see the XR controller left hand and XR controller right hand. I'll select the right hand since that's what I'm setting up input for. And it shows us those common bindings again, although we want the grip strength option, so I'll hit optional controls. And then right up here at the top you can see grip and grip pressed. Grip has a little icon to the left of a dot with arrows on either side. That indicates that it's a value range of 0 to 1. Grip pressed has a little button with an arrow pointing down, indicating that it is an either off or on Boolean option. For this grip strength action, I'm going to go ahead and select grip. And now we can see that it's bound to grip right hand XR controller. Next, I'm going to go ahead and create another action. This one I will call grip triggered. I'll leave its action type as a button, since this is supposed to represent when the player has fully pressed the grip button. So go down to where it says no binding, go over to path. In my case, it has kept XR controller selected for right hand. If it reset you back to the controller selection, go ahead and click XR controller, right hand, and we're going to go back to optional controls. Since our action type is a button, it has selected only the options that fulfill that Boolean value option here. And for this one, I'll go ahead and click grip pressed. And that's now showing up in our path as well. For our purposes, this will be good enough. We can go ahead and hit Save Asset and close the window. Up next, I'm going to go back to the asset root And I'm going to go into the scripts folder that already exists. I'm going to go ahead and create another folder, and I'm going to name it core. Inside of this, I'll go ahead, right click, create C# script, and I'm going to name mine input controller. I can go ahead and double click this, and it'll open up Visual Studio. With Visual Studio open, the first thing I'm going to do is come up here, enter a new line, set up a namespace, simply called core, and I'm going to select the entire class and cut and paste it up into that namespace. Namespaces are an organizational tool to help make sure that your code stays clean and doesn't collide with any other classes that might be imported through a third-party package or any of Unity's other namespaces. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and delete both of these start and update methods. And at the very top here, I'm going to write a public static input controller named instance. It'll be a property, and I'm giving it both a get and a set option. Below that, we'll make a private void awake method, and then we're going to check to see if instance is null. We're going to go ahead and assign it to this. Otherwise, if instance isn't this, we'll call destroy, passing in this reference. That way the input controller script will get destroyed if there's already an input controller assigned. Next up, we're going to go to below our public static option here, and I'm going to create a private core input actions variable named input actions. And below the instance equals this in our awake, I'll go ahead and assign input actions a new core input actions. And while I'm here, I'm going to create another method that we're calling called populate default notify lists. It doesn't exist currently, so I'll come down below awake. It'll be a private void populate default notify lists. Since we have a method to actually default our list, we'll need the lists themselves that represent our actions that we can perform. So I'll make a private list action grip triggered notifies. And this is actually going to be an array. It'll be initialized to 2 since it will have an index per hand. If your IDE doesn't understand what action is, you can either right click or hit Control period and select the top option for using system. We'll need another list of actions for our grip strength. This one though will actually take another parameter in the action called float. And with both of those, we can come down into our populate default notify lists and create a loop. And then we'll initialize each index of those 2 variables we just made. Okay, with those two lists defaulted, I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to go over to the Assets, Core, Scripts. I'm going to right click the Scripts folder. I'm going to hit Add, New Folder. I'm going to name one VR. I'll right click that new folder, Add New Item, and I'm going to name it Hand Input. I'm going to clean up the namespace provided by Visual Studio so that it's just VR. And instead of a public class hand input, I'll do a public enum hand input. And I'll put right and left inside of them. These will be useful later for determining which controller or which hand is performing a certain action. So we can now go back to our input controller script, and we can actually start binding some actions. Below our populate default notify list, I'm going to do a private void start, and inside of here I'm going to do input actions dot right hand, and right hand is that original action map that we made, and we can see here that there's a grip strength and a grip triggered. I'll go ahead and select grip triggered, and then I'm going to access its .performed property. Now at this point I could have a handle grip triggered method, like this. It takes in an input action.callback context. Although we will be adding a lot of actions to this throughout the lifetime of the project, and it's simpler to instead, it's easier to do underscore equals greater than, and then call a method that we'll make in a moment called trigger action notifies. That takes in our grip triggered notifies, and the index will actually cast our hand input dot right to an int. And now below that we can do private void trigger action notifies. We'll take in a list of action parameter called notifies, and then do for each notify and notifies, invoke it. For safety, I'll go ahead and add the question mark before the period. That simply checks to see if it's null before attempting to call the invoke method, and if it is, it will safely not crash. You may also notice that it currently doesn't understand what hand input means, so again you can right click or hit control period and go ahead and select using VR, and that will include our namespace at the top, and everything should be happy. Let's go ahead and also add in for our grip strength. So again, input actions, right hand, grip strength, performed. This time, however, instead of doing underscore, I'm going to write CTX, and that stands for context, another arrow, and I'll call trigger float notifies. Passing in grip strength notifies with our casted int of hand input dot right. Now we'll need to generate that method as well. So private void trigger float notifies, taking a list of action with a float parameter, we'll call it notifies, and we're also going to take in a float value. Similar to above, we'll do var notify and notifies, notify, invoke the pass in value. And above in our original declaration, we also need to take the float parameter in. So we'll do ctx.readValue float, and that'll actually read the float value from the input. Last thing we'll want to do in here is do input actions enable and input actions dot right hand dot enable. The last class that I'm going to go ahead and write, it will help us verify that all of our input is currently working. On the VR folder, I'll right click, add new item, make sure class is selected, and I'll create a class called debug hand. Inside of this, I'll again clean up the namespace so that it's just VR. I'll say public class, and I'll make sure that it inherits from mono behavior. At the top here, I'll do a serialized field, private hand input, hand, and I'll also write a start method, and our start method will actually call our input controller and register some events. I'll pass in hand as the parameter, and I'll pass in a new function as well called handle grip strength notify. Before going back to our input controller class, I'll go ahead and write out our handle method. And now we have to actually add our register method to our input controller. So I'll double click, copy, jump back to our input controller. Above our start, I'm going to add a public void, paste in that name, register grip strength notify. It will take an action float parameter called notify, as well as a hand input parameter called hand, and then I'll say grip strength notifies, casting our hand, add notify. I'll go ahead and copy this, switching over register grip strength to register grip triggered notify. Remove the float off of action and switch this over to grip triggered notifies. It can also be handy to go ahead and create unregister methods as well. So I'll copy my register grip triggered, call unregister, and instead of add, remove. And I'll do the same for grip strength. Okay, if we head back to our debug hand, everything should look good. I'll go ahead and add in an input controller .instance .register grip triggered notify, passing in hand and handle grip triggered notify, and add that handle method as well. With these methods in place, we'll simply add some debug statements. We'll say hand grip triggered, and the handle grip strength notify will also say hand grip strength, and I'll take a casted value times 100 to get a nice 1 to 100%. With our debug hand class finished, we can now go back to Unity and let it compile. Now that we're back in Unity, we can come zoom into the scene, click our main camera, right click, go down to XR, convert main camera to XR rig. I'm actually going to name mine VR rig. We can notice that it has some rotation and position information, and I'm going to zero all those out. Our camera's now in the wall, so I'm going to move it just so it's in the center of the room. On the VR rig object, I'm going to go ahead and add our input controller mono behavior, and in the VR rig, I'll right click it, create empty. I'm going to name this VR controller right hand. I can add our debug hand. Make sure that it is set to right. Save those. And while we're on the hand as well, go ahead and click Add Component, Tracked Pose Driver, this bottom one for New Input System. For our position action, we can hit the plus sign, add binding, double click no binding, and just like we did before, for path, select it, go to XR controller, right hand, and for position, we want device position, and then for rotation, plus, add binding, double click, path, XR controller right hand, device rotation. One last thing I like to do is on the VR controller, create a cube, size it to something like 0.03, 0.1, 0.2, so we can see it there, just to visualize the hand in game. With everything done, I'll switch over to console, clear it, and we should be able to put our headset on and hit play, and check the result. Alright, well, thank you everybody for watching my tutorial video. Please hit the like and subscribe button down below. I'll be trying to put out a new tutorial video every week. I already have a few planned out, but if there's anything in particular you'd like to see, go ahead and leave a comment. I'll make sure to read them all, and see you guys next time. Bye!